Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Oh, Tony, we get to talk about Michigan again. They just played the same game for the second straight week against maybe a worse team than the first week. Um, Excited? Question mark.
No, Tom, you don't watch a lot of TV, but on a lot of these TV shows that are out now, they will, you'll have 12 minutes of show, and then they'll go to a commercial, and then they'll come back and have like 6 minutes of recap of the 12 minutes that you just watched. So if people feel like this isn't enough of a show, just go back to you can just reference the last show or something like that. Put the two shows together because really it's the same thing we said about the Ohio State Youngstown State game. The only thing you can learn from this is something bad if the performance isn't there. And so that's what we have to go on. And Michigan winning 35-7 over UNLV. Surprisingly only 14-0 with a minute to go in the second quarter. And it just feels to me like Michigan is as excited about their non-conference schedule as we are, because it's just, let's just hurry up and get over with it, get it done with. Except they're doing it without any urgency at all.
Well, they just don't look like Michigan right now, and that's good in some ways in that they have this incredibly efficient passing attack, which they have typically not had in the past. But the running game has been kind of, I mean, it's hard to say this in a game where Blake Corum scored 3 touchdowns, but the running game has been kind of uninspiring so far through 2 weeks. And I think what was most telling to me about Michigan, it just feels like Michigan's just kind of like, well, we're just going to work on some stuff, and it's like you can, they're like bored, and they're going to just like, okay, let's make this a little bit of a challenge. Let's spend the whole first half in 3rd and 7, and we'll convert all of them. But at least then there's a little bit of drama because we know if we have 4 downs to pick up 10 yards, we're obviously going to get that. But then they had six times they were in 3rd and 6 plus in the first half. There was also a 3rd and 5, so 7 3rd and 5 or longer, and I think they picked up all of them. And it was all just kind of, okay, JJ McCarthy takes a snap and maybe dances a little bit in the pocket and then finds a guy who's open by 15 yards, and then they have a first down, and then they move chains and lather, rinse, repeat. And, yeah, if he can do this against Penn State, yeah, that would be really impressive. If he can do that against Ohio State, yeah, that would be really impressive. I mean, yeah, you can do it against UNLV, you can do it against East Carolina, like that's great. But like you said, I don't know how much we've really learned other than JJ McCarthy can hit wide open receivers, and I think we all learned that last year in the Ohio State game, so I don't know that we've learned anything.
Speaking of Groundhog Day, but yeah, the receivers are so open right now, and he's on point. I think he completed his first 13 passes, was like 17 of 18 in the first half. That is not, that was kind of the question going into the season. Could he just be accurate? The real question is what kind of, we've talked about the tight windows, and there's been very little need for tight windows to this point. There eventually will be, maybe, but they're not going to face a ranked team until Penn State, which I believe is the 10th game of the season, something like that. So there's going to be quite a lot of this, and trying to convince ourselves that Minnesota could do something, or you never know when you go into Lincoln what can happen, and anything with Jeff Sims throwing to whomever, assuming he's healthy at that point, anything can happen, literally almost anything. And so when you've got the accuracy that JJ McCarthy is working with now, it is surprising to me that they can be throwing the ball so well and it isn't really doing anything for the running game. Now, I don't know if that is because the focus defensively is so heavy on the running game that it is opening up the passing game, in which case, good job on taking what the defense is giving you. But right now, Blake Corum rushed for, I think, 80 yards on 15 carries in this one, along of 19. Donovan Edwards, again, last week he was shut down pretty much. This week it was 6 carries for 9 yards. Just looking at the effectiveness of the run game and the success rate, Donovan Edwards was 27.6% 57% this week. Success rate being you get 50% of the yards needed on first down, 70% on second down, and 100% of the yards needed on third or fourth down. He's not getting it done. He only, I think, he hit one of his 6 carries was a technically successful run. Blake Corum doing a little bit better. He was at 64% or 56% this week, but together this week they were 19 of 43 on successful runs, so 44% success rate for them, and it's not good enough against a program that you should be able to run on. And we've been saying the same things about Ohio State, and Michigan fans didn't like hearing the similarities going into the season with the offensive line and the newness there. But right now, the offensive line is not getting it done, and in terms of the running game, and the running backs aren't necessarily getting it done either. Right now, those two aren't even averaging 100 yards a game together. They're at like 99.5.
Yeah, this feels like we're saying so many of the same things about Michigan that we are about Ohio State. And the two teams ended up with exactly the same final score last week, which it felt like they got there in kind of different ways. Ohio State had a more explosive first half, and then Michigan was better in the second half. But, and then Ohio State gave up the 1 touchdown drive at the very beginning of the game, and no one has scored on Michigan in the first, 57 minutes of either game. So, they're slightly different, but you end up with the same final score. But it does feel like they're both kind of knocking the rust off and working on some stuff. And I don't know that I'm as concerned about Michigan. Michigan has been kind of uninspired on the ground, but it just sort of feels like they'll figure it out. I think they get the benefit of the doubt on the offensive line, maybe a little bit more than Ohio State does right now. It is a little weird to me that Donovan Edwards has been just so ineffective. You wonder if you're going to find out later, he wasn't 100% or something like that earlier in the season. The long runs, Corum had a 19-yarder, but other than that, McCarthy had a couple good runs on third down where he picked up third down runs, 3 carries, 38 yards for him. They're not going to run him a lot in these situations, but I think you're seeing how he can be effective in those situations. Cornelius Johnson had the A.J. Henning Memorial end around, the exactly one end around that goes for 26 yards that it seems like Michigan is good for every single game. Jack Tuttle had maybe one of the best play fakes, ball fakes I've seen in quite a while. Everyone in the stadium is looking at the running back and getting tackled and going, well, why did he give that? And then he's like, whoop, out and runs up for 14 yards and a first down, and then gets shoved way out of bounds into like a Gatorade rack or something and leaves the game with an injured arm. It looks like he's probably fine, which is good. But it was, they ran the ball effectively at times, but not really with the guys you expected them to run the ball effectively with. There was one point where they got stuffed on 4th and 3, and you have some of those, what they should be able to run in short yardage against this kind of, you should just be able to push the other team's offensive line 3 yards based on the talent of your offensive line. You're having some of the same conversations with the Michigan offensive line and the Michigan offense on the ground as you are with Ohio State right now. Am I off base there, or do you kind of get the same sense that it's like, it's whatever. It looks kind of rough right now, but you sort of know they're going to figure it out at some point.
Yeah, I have much more confidence that Michigan is going to figure out their running game than Ohio State will figure out theirs. I almost feel like Ohio State's not necessarily is what it is and is what it's going to be, but it's closer to what it's going to be than Michigan. Because I also think if Michigan is struggling to run the ball in Big Ten play, you just make J.J. McCarthy more of that with some read option and things like that. And that should help the other guys open everything up at that point. And if you can get, he had 38 yards rushing. If you get that when you need it, that makes everything else a little bit easier. It makes the linebackers a little bit slower, freezes some things for the other guys. And let's be honest, Donovan Edwards only needs that split second, and Blake Corum only needs a split second to see something to be able to make the move that he needs. So I think if they find that they're not able to just hand the ball off, or if they get a little bit predictable, like last year when they ran 95% of the time out of the pistol, and you could kind of just read how they were going to run or pass based on their alignment, if that starts to become an issue, you just make J.J. McCarthy more of the run game, I think. And you only need to do it a couple of times to get the defense to think that it could happen at any point. So I think there are better fixes there, plus the history of those running backs. the offensive line, as you said. Although this is a different offensive line, it's not last year's offensive line. And Jim Harbaugh said something about you're going to start 2 tackles on in the first game, and then 2 different tackles the second game. It was the same starting tackles, albeit they did start 6 offensive linemen in this game, with Trente Jones starting as the left tackle, basically the sixth lineman outside of Carson Barnhart, the left tackle. So I feels like while they're still searching, I think they may have settled on their starters at this point. And I'm not sure what Jim Harbaugh has had to say about that on his Monday presser, but the fact that they kept those same guys lends me to believe like they might be searching as well in terms of we need to get these guys right. Let's get them the cohesion that every offensive line needs. And so maybe this will build. And next week we'll find out against, is it what, Bowling Green? Is that who they, like, who cares?
You don't just walk in and beat a Scott Leffler coach team, Tony.
Yes, you do.
Oh, sorry. Checking notes. Oh, it turns out, in fact, that you do, in fact, walk in and beat a Scott Leffler coach team. Yeah, these games are all kind of pointless, and that's why I really don't read anything much into the struggles that they're having right now. You're working stuff out. You've got 3 new starting offensive linemen, and I know people, like, some of the guys have only started some of the games last year. Like, okay, that's fine, whatever. Like, you have at least a couple spots where you have new starters, and it's the beginning of the season. You're playing games where you're going to win, so you're going to try to work on stuff that you want to work on stuff that you're not necessarily going to be great at, and that you want to get better at. Because, yeah, you could come out and run all sorts of crazy fun stuff and put up 63 points, and in the end, it doesn't matter. No one is going to look at Michigan 63, UNLV 7 any differently than they do Michigan 35, UNLV 7 by the time we get to the college football playoff selection show kind of portion of the season. These games, no one will remember these games by the time we get there, so it doesn't really matter. So I just don't read a whole lot into the struggles. I do read more into the defense because I guess specifically how they're winning up front right now in a way that Ohio State is not putting up enormous numbers out of the defensive line. Michigan's defensive line, especially the interior of the defensive line, was really good on Saturday. I mean, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, Kenneth Grant, like those guys are not just controlling and occupying blockers. They're making plays. They had the defense on the whole had 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. That's impressive. And, they had, I think you go back to last year, you heard us talk a lot about the fact that Michigan's defense kind of feasted on 3rd and long. And I think 2 of those sacks came on 3rd and 13s when it's an obvious passing down and, you're going up against a wildly overmatched offensive line and just bringing more pressure they can handle. But, the defense feels like it's better than I expected, especially because they're playing without several guys in the secondary.
Yeah, watching this defensively, Kenneth Grant again stood out, and we're talking about their defense, one of their backup defensive tackles, backup in quotes. He's in the rotation. He plays quite a bit. He stood out the first week. He, I'm taking some notes and I'm writing down, Kenneth Grant looks like he should, one of those defensive tackles at Georgia. And then as soon as I write that down, whoever's doing the game, it's like, he's like one of these defensive tackles you see at Georgia. I'm like, crap. That's how far my college football takes have fallen. I am now a TV broadcaster worthy. But he, 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack and a half, I believe. Just too big to handle at this point for these smaller schools. Finished with 4 tackles, like I said, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. He is different than everybody else in terms of you see him and you notice him. It's like when DeJuan Jones is on the offensive line, you don't have to search for a number. You just search for a body and you say, okay, I know who Kenneth Grant is. He's the largest person on the field. And yeah, he's got plenty of drive and is occupying not just the blockers, but the ball carriers as well. Mason Graham, tackle and a half for loss and a half a sack. For those guys on the interior, and of course, Chris Jenkins as well. Like that's a pretty good trio right there. And and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing against everybody. So, I mean, UNLV rushed for 61 yards. They had 2 carries. They had a 21-yarder and a 20-yarder. So basically, the other 29 of their carries netted them 20 yards. So not bad there. And they also got some good pressure from their edge guys, Jalen Harrell. Derek Moore got a sack. I thought Derek Moore's sack was really quick, and Jalen Harrell was just making a mess of the UNLV pocket.
Yeah, both of those guys, and then Braden McGregor too. He had a tackle and a half for loss. I mean, it just the defensive line was just kind of constantly in the backfield. And again, this is one of these things where you don't want to read too much into this right now. It looked like what a good defensive line should look like against a not at all good offensive line. Like that's what that's supposed to look like. You haven't seen those numbers from Ohio State. Now Ohio State runs a little bit of a different scheme. I'm going to be talking to Ross Fulton about that on one of the morning shows later this week. But I mean, this is a defense that we came into the season thinking, well, you've lost some guys, and maybe there's a little bit of a step back, and it doesn't look, we have not seen any indication so far that there's a step back, and they haven't been tested. And UNLV's offense, I mean, I don't know exactly how much to attribute to Michigan and how much to attribute to UNLV, but man, oh man, UNLV's offense looked awful. There was a point. I mean, it's not all Michigan, because there was a point where I think there was a 3rd down and UNLV's quarterback missed a somewhat open receiver by about 8 to 10 yards. I mean, like, just, that is not defense. There was not a guy in his face. It was just like, oh, you just can't throw the football to a receiver. So, I don't think UNLV is going to end up like a 9-3 team this year, but Michigan is doing what they're supposed to do in a game like this. So, yeah, I don't know what else. I don't know what else you're supposed to say other than like, yeah, okay. You didn't see any reason to be concerned about the Michigan defense for sure.
No, and they were without starting safeties Rod Moore and Makari Page. I thought they were without Will Johnson as well, but I guess he played a few plays. Like, I don't know if maybe that came in the 4th quarter, which I may not have watched. But
he didn't show up in the box score, I don't think.
He's in the participation report, and also I was told on Twitter after I wrote in Michigan Monday that he didn't play, that, oh, by the way, he did play. So I had to go and correct that, or not correct it, just leave it out. I'm not going to issue a correction for something for 6 to 8 plays or whatever, but I do appreciate people on Twitter telling me, correcting me in a helpful manner, if you will, which is strange.
Yeah, I gotta say, I didn't notice him playing either, but it's not like UNLV was pushing the ball downfield a whole heck of a lot, so he could have played 60 snaps, and I don't know that I would have noticed him. So, yeah, but I mean, to do that without both safeties, like, okay, again, UNLV is not the team where you'd really worry about that. This is like when Ohio State had to start Jair Brown, the true freshman, at corner last year against Wisconsin, and it's like, well, boy, Wisconsin would love to take advantage of that. And then you look at Wisconsin's wide receivers and Wisconsin's quarterback, and you kind of go, oh, well, nevertheless. And then they ended up scoring 7 points. And it was kind of the same thing here, which, like, yeah, you'd love to take some shots over the top without both safeties in there, and with Will Johnson being limited or to whatever he was limited to, and like very clearly did not have the personnel. And even if they had the personnel, probably would not have had the time to take any shots downfield.
We will talk about the new clock rules on Buckeyes tomorrow morning at some point this week. But Tom, looking at these possessions for UNLV, they had a 4-minute possession that went 25 yards, 4 minutes and 3 seconds, 7 plays, 25 yards. That seems like an awful lot of time for just 25 yards. And then you look at Michigan had a 10-play, 83-yard drive that lasted 4:06. Just like 3 seconds longer with 3 more plays. And this, it just, the new clock rule, I think, can be weaponized if you want it to be. But it was just interesting to me, like 7 plays, 25 yards, 4 minutes and 3 seconds. I assume there's 2 first downs in there. That just seems like a lot of going nowhere. And, then, like, because I was just looking to see how effective Michigan's defense was, and that was a 25-yard drive. Like, they didn't really give up anything until the final 2 drives, and even really the final drive of the game, 9 plays, 81 yards. This was exactly what you would expect from this is exactly what Michigan's defense should have done. It's what Ohio State's defense should have done. Ohio State's defense gave up pretty much 2 drives where they weren't able to get off the field. Michigan pretty much able to get off the field until like they played so many guys in this game. I wonder if at what one point in the maybe the final drive, what the percentage of scholarship players to walk-ons was. I have no idea. I didn't see it. No offense to anybody, but I'm not taking anything from that drive or really this game.
Yeah, the fourth quarter, UNLV had 2 drives, 8 plays for 37 yards. It took 4:14 off the clock. 9 plays for 81 yards. It took 5:34 off the clock. So, between them, 9 minutes and 48 seconds on those 2 drives. But yeah, I take absolutely nothing away from those because they were playing guys you might not see for the rest of the season. And when UNLV was out there and when the Michigan starters were out there, 7 plays, 19 yards, 3 plays, -9 yards, 4 plays, 5 yards, 7 plays, 25 yards, 1 play right before half, 3 plays, 8 yards, 7 plays, 42 yards, kind of middle of the third quarter, 3 plays, -10 yards. They never really got anything going, and they couldn't run the ball with any kind of consistency because they couldn't get any kind of push up front. They weren't opening up any real holes. And then the quarterback play was not great, which when you have a pass rush in your face the whole time, you're going to have that from time to time. So it was just a very nothing performance. I mean, when Ohio State played UNLV, when was it, 2017, 2018, something like that, I just sort of remember it being the same basic game where it was just, yeah, this team is here. They're every once in a while, something exciting would almost happen, and then it was right back to like, nope, nothing's happening at all. And Michigan being up 14-0 just before half, like, yeah, it looks kind of not that impressive on the scoreboard, but when you look at teams, I think Tennessee was 6-6 with their FCS opponent. Kentucky was close with their FCS opponent. I mean, there were a lot of teams. 14-0 against UNLV just before half is not impressive, but also it felt like just about everyone looked like that for extended stretches during the first half that were playing like FCS teams or really, really bad FBS teams. So I feel like even the negative stuff, you don't really draw any meaningful conclusions from.
No, unless you lose, then it's like, well, they are who we thought they were. But
former Michigan head coach or former Michigan coach Mo Linguist, he was on the wrong side of one of those with Buffalo. But yeah, for pretty much everyone else in FBS, Nevada was on the wrong side, on the real wrong side of one of those. Michigan's fine.
That 2017 game against UNLV, Ohio State won 54-21. Famous for Tate Martell being reunited with his former high school head coach and maybe a teammate or two. I guess if that's famous at all.
I think of that as the C.J. Saunders game. I think C.J. Saunders might have had like 100 yards running in that game, or 100 yards receiving in that game, maybe. But yeah, I mean, that was one where Ohio State was up. They had 44 points at halftime, and UNLV scored a couple touchdowns. UNLV outscored Ohio State in the second half, so fire whoever the Mike Hart of that game was, I guess. But I mean, it was that game was 37-0 before UNLV got on the board, and that game was over in the middle of the second quarter. So yeah, that was not the most scintillating game.
So as we said, Michigan has Bowling Green coming up this week, and then finally their real schedule begins with a home game against Rutgers. And as I wrote Michigan Monday, I can't believe we're to this point in life where we're actually looking forward to Michigan finally getting to the Rutgers game. Like it's going to be a little bit different. Rutgers has given Michigan some trouble over the years, and not that we need to start talking about that game just yet, because we'll need most of next week's Michigan Monday show to talk about Rutgers, because there will be nothing else to talk about. But with this schedule, Tom, I think they're going to be double-digit favorites until they get to Penn State, which is November 11th, 2 months from today. And so like they could get supremely confident to the point where they get overconfident. And so that might be something to guard against. But even with this schedule, like I are they too talented to be scared, or to be like not afraid, but like to be scared in terms of could they have some close calls on the road? Are they too talented for that? Because I feel like Minnesota is one of those programs that just kind of makes things bad for you unless you are vastly more talented than they are. And Michigan has some players that are vastly more talented, but do you see that game being? Can it be a 10-point game?
It could be a 10-point game. I haven't been overwhelmed with Minnesota so far this year either. This is a Michigan team that I feel like we're going to get into mid-November before we know anything about this Michigan team. Like unless something crazy happens, they should not have a particularly close game. They should win all these games by at least 10 to 14 points at least between now and the Penn State game. There's no one on the schedule that is, remotely in their ballpark in terms of talent overall. And, that being said, I fully expect one of these games to be kind of close and gross. Michigan has a way of doing that for some reason. The last time Rutgers was in Ann Arbor, it was Michigan won 20-13, and Rutgers had the ball maybe on their own 30, 35, something like that, driving to try and tie the game. And I think there was a strip sack or something. And, there's no way that Michigan, the 2021 Michigan team that ended up beating Ohio State and going to the college football playoff, there's no reason that team should ever have been within a touchdown of Rutgers. But they figured out a way to do that. And, like Michigan State, what do you expect from Michigan State this year? With the whole gestures vaguely situation going on up there right now, what do you expect from them? It just, Nebraska might be able to keep it. They have Nebraska on the schedule, right? I'm remembering that correctly. Yeah, they've got Nebraska on the schedule. Nebraska, like, okay, maybe they can play. The defense looks solid enough that if Michigan comes in uninspired, that game could be 17-13 in the third quarter or something like that. Like I fully expect this is a college football team, Tony. Yeah. What do college football teams do? They give you inconsistent performances against inferior talent from time to time, just often enough that it keeps things interesting, in games like this. So yeah, at some point this season, one to two times this season, Michigan is going to play a little bit uninspired and look like, oh man, are they going to lose to significantly less talented team? And the answer will be no, but it'll be interesting into the third quarter.
2 years ago when they went to Nebraska, they held on for a 32-29 win. There was an Adrian Martinez turnover at the end of the game. And I'm not just saying that willy-nilly and knowing I'm right. I believe that actually happened. And of course, any type of close game against Nebraska means that you're going to pull it out. So, 2021, they had a couple of close calls. Then last year, Maryland, a 7-point game. Illinois down the stretch, a 2-point game. So they get 2 of these a year, and we'll see where those come up before the actual schedule gets going. And maybe that is at Maryland the week after Penn State and the week before Ohio State. We've seen some crazy stuff there happen in person on the field there at Maryland before the Michigan game. So anything can happen there, perhaps. Tom, anything else?
Yeah, the Maryland trip to Maryland the week before the game is we've been down there twice. The last 2 times Ohio State was down there, and you and I were down there. The 2020 game down there got canceled, but 2018 that one went to overtime. 2022 that one went down, close to the wire. It wasn't really in doubt. And Maryland I think didn't get much. Within 90 yards or so of a touchdown at the end of the game. But, it was close enough against a team that you shouldn't be close enough to that. I fully expect Michigan to have an uninspiring performance there in an incredible sandwich game situation between Penn State and Ohio State at the end of the season after playing no one for 9 weeks.
Yeah, you're going to get ramped up, and then you're like, okay, we made it past Penn State, and then let's take a break, and you can't, and we'll see how it goes. But we'll have many more Michigan Monday shows to talk about how they're going to handle that Maryland game, because there's not going to be a lot to talk about before then. But it will be interesting to see how they rise and how the running game continues and all of that. So I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you're not yet a member, please join. Say hello to us there. Of course, you can continue to find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, Facebook.com/BuckeyeHuddle. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.